everyone, and welcome back to the MedBoys podcast. Today, we have with us here today Jayneel Limbachia. He's a first-year medical student at the Schulich School of Medicine in London, Ontario. He is heavily involved in research and in the community. He's the co-founder of COVID-19 Made Simple, a grassroots organization that provides accurate, reliable, and concise information to the public about COVID-19. We're extremely fortunate to have him with us today. How are you doing, Jayneel?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. It was very much of an elaborate introduction. I don't know if it's really necessary, but thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you for coming on, Jayneel. We really appreciate your time. But yeah, let's just get right into it. I'm sure a lot of our viewers are wondering one thing on their mind, since you are a medical student. Could you tell the viewers a little bit about why you want to pursue medicine or when you wanted to become a doctor?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I mean, I would say that I wasn't someone that always wanted to do medicine or become a doctor since I was a child. I actually probably learned too late in the process that I wanted to do medicine. It was sort of an elimination process, to be honest. I kind of came to medicine after eliminating a few things. When I started university at Western, also, I wanted to do research. I thought that I wanted to kind of create or create medications rather than, I guess, prescribe medications. That's what my understanding of medicine was at that point anyways. And eventually I kind of realized over time that that's not the only thing that I wanted to do. I liked more, hands-on sort of person-to-person contact. And then through some experiences, I sort of decided that, okay, this is why I want to do medicine. And so, yeah, it's been a journey, and a lot of my experiences have sort of informed my decision to do medicine, and that's kind of how it started.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, you sound very ambitious, and we all know about you. And I think it's the same for us as well. We've always, been a fan of medicine since we were young. Maybe not at 10 because I wanted to become like Spider-Man or something when I was 10. But
Yeah.
that grew for us as well. But I guess since you talked about undergrad, can you talk about a little bit more about how you got into medicine from undergrad onwards? So just your path into medicine?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, as I said, I did my undergrad at Western University, or UWO, that's what it was called back then, in medical sciences. That's, I guess, like another classic pre-med program. And so, when I entered the program, everyone around me wanted to do medicine. And there's actually an interesting sort of story, because in our first year class, one of our professors who taught us bio, he had this exercise that he did with almost every incoming class, where he would tell us to raise hands if we wanted to do medicine. And then obviously, out of 800 kids, I would say maybe like 600 wanted to do medicine. So everyone raised their hands. And then he'd be like, yeah, like only like 2% of you will actually make or get in or whatever. And at that point, I was very happy to be the one that didn't raise their hand, because I was like, oh, I don't want to be part of this herd. But life works in strange ways, because here I am, and things are different. But yeah, so I mean, I did my undergrad, and as I said, I wanted to do research, but then I learned that research wasn't the only thing that I could do, because I did a lot of bench lab research in undergrad, and that kind of was limiting. I was only working closed doors, and I'm the type of person that likes to interact with people. So I was like, I need more interaction. And so that's when I kind of started exploring. And I have to say that, a lot of my decision to pursue medicine has been informed by one of my cousins who started medical school when I was probably in my second or third year of undergrad at U of T. And I saw him kind of go through the process and what things that he was learning, things that he was doing. And I was like, oh, this could be something that I should actually explore. And then I would say maybe around third year is when I really started taking this seriously. I actually started doing observerships. Luckily, I was fortunate to have gotten an opportunity in one of the hospitals in London, and I think I shadowed a lot of radiation and medical oncology then, and that was probably one of the sort of turning points, because that's when I really started to realize, let's say, what a doctor does on a day-to-day basis. And one specific story always comes to mind is the time when one of the radiation oncologists broke the news of someone having to go on chemo for their cancer treatment, and it always kind of stuck with me. So that sort of thing was when I was, okay, now I need to understand more about medicine. So I started, volunteering more, and started doing the basic pre-med stuff, like going to hospitals, volunteering there, and then doing some extracurriculars, research, that kind of jazz. And then when I applied in my last year of undergrad, I wasn't successful. I was actually, so I have to be honest here. When I realized in 30 that I wanted to do medicine, I sat down this one night and kind of calculated my GPA for the first time. And and I'll be honest, I was at like 3.4, 3.5. And I was like, okay, I don't think this is the kind of number that a pre-med should have if I want to do medicine, let alone if I want to do medicine in Ontario is a whole another story. And so I was very surprised. I didn't really realize, I guess, what I was, I had, I was a passive learner until that point, I would say. And then that kind of woke me up. And so that was another thing. I also couldn't really express that to anyone else because I was like, even to my cousin, if I tell him that, he's going to be like, okay, I don't know if you can or should be pursuing medicine. I only maybe confided in one of my friends. And anyway, so I kept going. I was like, I'm just going to keep trying. And then, so I applied my fourth year. Of course, with that kind of a GPA, nothing was going to work out really. So then I knew that I had to do another year of undergrad. So I ended up doing a fifth year. And my fourth year, even my third year, actually, third, fourth year, fifth year, because I knew what I needed to get and I was more active in my learning, I was able to improve my GPA, but still the first 2 years was a little bit of a problem. And then so I did my fifth year. I didn't get in after my fifth year either. And so I was okay, what is next? And then at this point, I had been doing a multiple different research projects, and I kind of switched over from just doing bench lab research to more clinical work. And clinical work was exciting again because I was getting to interact with people. So now I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do a master's. What am I going to do a master's in was also sort of up in the air. And then I heard about the health research methodology program at McMaster, and then I heard about the global health program at McMaster. Those were the two that I kind of applied to, and it just happened to be that the health research methodology program worked out for me, and so I started that program, and I think that was probably the career defining moment for me, and I don't say this loosely because I think that was also another way for me to realize what medicine is about and what I can achieve in medicine as a career. Because I think in undergrad, obviously, you have this perception of what a physician's role is in the healthcare system, but then you don't actually really understand it until you work in the healthcare system. So I think my supervisor at McMaster, Dr. Sanyan, and her team were exceptional. They really were able to sort of not only guide me but inspire me to do multiple different things and understand there's so many layers to how a physician can help individuals and societies even. So that's what happened. And then so I applied in my last year of my master's. It was a 2 year thesis based master's, and I had an interview, or I was waitlisted at Dalhousie, which was a little bit, I mean, I was surprised by it, but I was obviously very excited and grateful for the opportunity. But then I didn't get off the wait list. And so that summer, I kind of decided to shift bases and go to British Columbia to work there at UBC. I know I'm talking too much. Sorry, I'll cut it short. But essentially, I went there and I worked there for a year, and that's when COVID kind of struck, and then so I had to come back and work here for a year. In throughout this whole time, in the 2 years after I was waitlisted at Dalhousie, I actually didn't even interview at Dalhousie, which was really weird. But sometimes it's hard to predict these things, as most of your audience probably is aware about. And so in my final year before I got in, where I was here and working at Mac again, I realized that I needed to switch things up again. Like I was obviously improving my application bits and pieces, but then I knew that my MCAT was one big factor that I could change, but was kind of limiting me because my CARS was low. And so I guess the summer of 2020 is when I decided to rewrite my MCAT. And I've already rewritten my MCAT at least 4 times prior to this. So I was like, okay, well, this has to be my last shot because I can't just keep doing this. So I rewrote it, and fortunately, I was able to kind of get a better score. Like I got a 127 in CARS, even though I dropped overall. I was able to meet the Western cutoff, and that kind of helped me get the Western interview. And I also got a Queen's interview last year, and then here we are now.
No, that story is very inspiring, Jayneel. I know a lot of our viewers will also connect with it because this process is just so hard. And your story just goes to show that if you have a positive mindset and you're willing to adapt and you just keep going, eventually it's going to work out no matter how many factors there are against you. And you just have to keep going, put your head down and work. You glossed over it a little. I wanted to ask you about it more in detail. How was your MCAT experience? You said you took it about 4 times. And how was Casper? Because that's a huge part of the application process nowadays.
Absolutely. Yeah. So maybe I'll start off with the MCAT. So, the first time I wrote it, I actually wrote it, probably in my second year, going into the third. That's when, at most of the pre-meds, I suppose, take it. And that time I don't, as I said, I really kind of understood or realized that I wanted to do medicine in third year. So that summer, I just took it for the sake of taking it. It was more of a herd mentality. As I said, I was part of a pre-med program. Everyone around me, all my friends were doing the MCAT. So I was like, oh, maybe I should do this just to keep my options open. And so I kind of just took it for the sake of taking it. And obviously MCAT is not the exam you take just for the sake of taking it. So I did poorly on it, and I didn't really have the right strategy to tackle the exam either. So that was that. And then, but I have to say also that that exam was probably the first time I ever had any sort of anxiety going into an exam. I am the type of person that don't necessarily face a whole lot of that. And I remember that very first one I did have a lot of anxiety, probably because I didn't prepare the way I should have prepared. Anyway, so then came the new MCAT, which was I was actually excited about. I liked the changes that they had made. And so that was the first time that I was coming. And so I ensured that this time around I had a right strategy in place. I did more research on how to study for it, et cetera, et cetera. And I was actually, I think I did quite good. I got a 512, but I had a low CARS, which was 124 at that point. And so at one point I was like, oh, you know what? I'm glad that I went from, I don't even remember what I got on the old one, but it was very low. And then I went to a 512, which was a decent sort of score, other than the whole 124 CARS situation. But yeah, so I knew that in Ontario, especially, that 124 CARS was not going to do anything, even if I had a high, overall score. And so the following year, I decided to take it again. I guess that's my third try now, and that time I dropped down my overall score because I was doing more stuff in the summer, like I was teaching, and then I was doing some research or whatever. So I dropped overall, then I got a 125 in CARS. And at that point, I was like, okay, maybe I can work a shot at U of T, especially because I was going to be doing my master's. And that time they had a separate sort of stream for the graduate students. I was like, okay, I'm going to take my shot at U of T. I put my eggs in one basket. That's probably one thing that maybe isn't the best thing to do. But anyways, that happened. And then, so U of T didn't work out over the years. And then, so I was kind of just working with that score. And, last or 2020 summer is when I was okay, now I really need to change that CARS score, because that 125 is the reason why things are not working out in Ontario. And that's when I decided to retake it that summer. And I, like, again, even that time, it was really, really hard for me to change the MCAT score, because I was in a position where, again, I was working full time at that point. And it was like one of those PTSD sort of things where the night before the MCAT, and again, as I said, it never really happens to me, but I was unable to like sleep, and I was surprised by it because I thought I would kind of have already brushed that off. Anyways, that happened, and then eventually, I guess things worked out. But even like, I guess all the way leading up to it, with MCAT being the type of test it was certainly difficult to kind of navigate the whole process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure many pre-M's have the exact same feeling as you, because the MCAT, of course, is a 7-hour exam. It's no joke, and you've got to make sure you're completely prepared for that. I know it was difficult for all of us going into that exam, and the stress, the nerves, it's not something that is really easy to handle. But I guess going along the lines of your CARS score, of course, you made a really big jump from your initial CARS score to the CARS score that is the Western cutoff. How did you go about making that jump, and what really like compelled you to keep pushing to make sure your CARS score was higher and higher each time?
Right. Initially, I'm sure all of us have heard about things like, oh, you need to get into comprehensive reading and all of that. And I have to be honest, I did start all of that when I first found out what my car score was, the 124, and I was like, oh, I'm going to try to improve this. So I started doing all that. But I think the thing with those things is it's a long-term commitment. It doesn't change in over a summer even, right? So when I like the reason I bring that up is my 127 at the end of it probably had a lot to do with many of these things that I developed over the years, but I can't really say that it was just one thing that kind of changed the ball game completely. So that is definitely one thing, like just getting used to more comprehensive reading and like reading as a whole. That's definitely one factor. I think though one thing I've realized in my final MCAT studying stage was that you have to keep things really, really simple. And I think that's what I've learned over my process as a whole. Sometimes we tend to overthink all of these strategies and ways to get one place or the other. And because medical school and like MCAT are so complex and hard to navigate, we always fall into these traps of, oh, what's the best strategy? Let me try to think of like, let me try to find out what's your tip, what's their tip. Everyone is different. I think everyone has their own sort of natural strategy towards things. And I think that's what I learned in my final sort of take on it, because just before a month, I was getting the worst car scores that I had gotten, even like compared to previous years. And I'm like, what is happening? And the reason I realized, thankfully, closer to the exam was that I had reverted in the process of trying to improve my score even more. I had picked on habits that were not me. I had picked on habits that I was trying to like take shortcuts to, answer a certain way, answer in a different order or some things like that. And eventually I was like, if I just keep things simple, at the end of the day, car section is what you read the passage, you try to understand the main sort of takeaway from the passage, and then you answer questions according to that. And if you need to go back, you go back. Like it's simple. Just keep it really, really simple. And I found that that's what helped me even on the day of, because sometimes I found that you may be very good at practicing a certain way, but then on the day of, your strategy just kind of falls apart. But if you keep things simple, then there is no strategy to even worry about. So I thought that was helpful.
That actually is very true. I think we all found the same. We learned the hard way as well, which is we came up with our own strategies. I know there's a lot of things out there, but really you just have to see what works for you. But yeah, thank you so much for that. That would really help us and everyone else. So we'll move on to the Casper test. So I know that you took, yeah, I know that you took the Casper test last year, but I do want to, if you could talk about that, but I do also want to bring up the new changes that they made to the Casper test. I'm not sure if you heard about them, but it's essentially just, I think 9 typed responses and 6 video-based scenarios. So 9 written and 6 video-based. So, and the video-based would be you have 1 minute to respond to each question out of the 3 for the scenario. So for the people that don't know, each scenario has 3 questions, and in each question they get 1 minute to answer each question. So yeah, if you have any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear about it.
Oh, that's interesting. Sorry. So I understand correctly, basically, instead of having 5 minutes for every question, and then, I mean, as far as I remember, it was every video, or even if it's a video or a text-based response, you have 5 minutes, and every question, every STEM had 3 parts to it. Now they've kind of split it individually.
No, so it's the exact same thing. It's just for 6 of the scenarios, you have to say the answer instead of type it out.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, interesting. Okay. Oh, that's very
And
different.
you get 1 minute to answer each question out of the
I see.
for each scenario.
Okay, very interesting. I mean, I'm not sure why they did that, but I'm assuming they probably found that when we typed our responses, sometimes it was very incoherent to even understand and make out what people were saying. And technically, I mean, what it sounds like to me is another form of an interview, right? Because that's what happens in an interview. You're essentially asked a question and you're talking about it for whatever 3 to 4 minutes, depending on the style. I think, and I remember when I did my last Casper, they introduced, I forget what the name was, but some schools had done this thing where
Snapshot.
in addition to, Snapshot, that's right. Yeah, so I guess this is just an elaborate snapshot that they're developing. I mean, in terms of my thoughts, I guess at surface level, it seems similar to me. And maybe being the person I am, I probably prefer talking it out more than writing it out. But I'm not sure if it makes too much of a difference in terms of like any sort of evaluation, because I guess what you're going to type is what you're going to say, and now you just kind of have to add a little bit of your personal flair to it. Maybe it's also good practice for the interview. Having said that, I think Casper as a whole, and I guess I forgot to mention or speak to this before, I think Casper is a good sort of evaluation because it gives you, I think it's more fun than, let's say, like the MCAT, for example, because at least you're, responding to situations that you face or have faced in your day-to-day lives. So that's kind of nice. And I think the other thing is there's a method to Casper, right? Most of us are probably familiar with it, and most people who prepare for it get used to it, practice it a lot. So I like that as well. And I think the learning curve for Casper is quite a lot too. I found that there's not a lot of curveballs that they throw at you. So yeah, I think that's one way. And I think in terms of the way people the way people use Casper schools wise, I guess every school is different. A lot of schools seem to be now picking up Casper as an additional measure of a candidate's candidacy. So I personally think that more evaluation factors, although they're cumbersome for the individual the students, might be actually beneficial to the student because you're not reliant on one or two factors. And then if you don't have those one or two factors, then it's hard to navigate the system.
Yeah, that's extremely true, Jayneel. Like we've found that as well because like before it was just GPA, MCAT, and now they've added the Casper. And even with the snapshot, like we did it this year, and it felt
Mhm.
exactly like an interview from what people have said. And
Right.
like that's what I want to ask you more about because yes, the Casper, MCAT, that's all pre-interview. And then once you got your interviews, from all the experiences you had before and how you'd reacted to them, how did you go about preparing for these interviews? And how did you make sure that you took this opportunity because like this is such a big opportunity and just made the best out of it?
Absolutely, and obviously, I think getting an interview is a huge milestone, and it's very, very important that everyone prepares for it as much as they can. I don't think there's a number that you can put to how much preparation you can do for it. So the more the better, obviously. I actually have like a five or four pillar sort of approach to interviews that I often talk about, and it's just kind of like the way I split my preparation. So the first thing is obviously, it's important to have a set of, important to reflect on your experiences, the ABS that you submitted to all these schools, especially if we're talking about Ontario. And what I did was that I used to go back to all of my activities that I put on my ABS, whatever, and I would look at what kind of CanMeds roles fit into those uh, experiences. For example, let's say hypothetically, we're talking about hospital volunteering because it's kind of ubiquitous across many medical students. So if I'm talking about hospital volunteering, CanMed's roles like communicator, collaborator, maybe even an advocate always fit into those. And then so I would think about examples that come to mind that I've gone through in my experience at the hospital that fit those. So again, hypothetically making this up, let's say sometimes I was working in the ER and then a patient came in that couldn't really speak the language of the nurses and the staff. And then I was able to speak that language and I kind of helped them navigate the ED through that. That's kind of advocating for the patient in a way. So, that's an example, a story that I can use when a situation presents where I can use that story, right? It's having these tools. And so I did that for most of my activities. I think it's also a very important practice for yourself because at the end of all of that reflection, what you want to be able to know is your brand for yourself. And I know that may not be the best word that I'm using here, but for the lack of a better word, it kind of is like the five things that really define you as a person. And I say five because it's also important to have diversity, right? You don't want to have one or two things that you always harp on when you talk about experiences. So those five things are your sort of like your identity, and you can easily use them and use stories from them when you have to answer interview questions, because the only thing that separates you and someone else from in an interview setting is personalization. Your stories are different. Even though you and I, Nimit, say the same thing, I'm saying different things based on my experiences. That's what matters, right? So that's the first step. I think the other sort of pillar really is making sure that you prepare the commonly asked questions, right? Again, it's a bit cliche and all of us really know about this, but it's so important to write it down and then practice and prepare it such that it doesn't even come off as memorized. So you have to be natural with it, right? So, questions like why medicine, questions like tell me about yourself, tell me about a time you failed. Those are commonly asked questions in many different shapes and forms. You need to have answers to those and well written answers to those. So that's the second thing. The third thing is, preparing answers or knowing about questions that relate to the healthcare system, medicine, and I guess academia as a whole in the times that we're in. So the most salient topics, things like medically assisted dying, or sometimes, nowadays, indigenous health is another big salient topic, cultural sensitivity, cultural safety, even things like genetics or AI in medicine. All of those things are very salient, important to know about, and so you can bring those into your answers when you're talking about different things. Then the fourth pillar, I would say, is knowing the ethics or ethical concepts, right? As a physician, you're always making ethically sound or ethically challenging decisions when it comes to patient care, when it comes to caring for their families and beyond. So you need to know four major concepts, I think: justice, autonomy, beneficence, non-beneficence. And so, just, I guess, reading up on those topics and what do they mean in different sort of situations, that's very, very important. And I think the fifth thing that kind of encompasses all of that is just practice, 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 because at the end of the day, that is all that matters, right? Even if you have all this bases covered, you need to be able to deliver it. And that's where practice comes in. It's important to practice with every different type of individual that you can get access to. My personal preference is making sure that you at least practice with people that go to that specific university so that you get that exact experience and feedback that is really well tailored to that school. So yeah, that's sort of my spiel.
Well, thank you for that, Jayneel. I'm sure all of our audience are going to definitely use all the tips that you provided for interviews. Since you're so experienced with interviews, I'm sure that those tips will definitely come in handy for everyone who was fortunate enough to get one this year. And I guess fast forward a few months after that interview, you got your acceptance letter to Western. I'm sure you must have been really, really happy when you did get that acceptance letter. So I'm sure throughout that summer you may have built up some expectations, or even across the years you've been applying to medicine, you may have built up these expectations about going to med school, what it's going to be like, what am I going to feel like? So when you've built up those expectations and you actually did get admitted to medical school, throughout your time currently, did those expectations match what you're currently going through, or was it easier? Was it more difficult? What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I would say that a question that I often get asked off late, especially. I, I don't know. This might be hard to communicate, but I am the type of individual that not necessarily always keeps expectations, and so when I went in, I kind of like I had an idea of how medical school would be like. Fortunately, I have family and friends that have been around or gone through the process, and I've kind of lived through them vicariously until now. But also, I didn't really think about, oh, how is it going to be? What is it going to be? How am I going to like it? And I think that's probably a better approach, at least personally. And I found it to be better because that way, even if my expectations aren't met, I'm not really flustered or bothered by it, because that happens quite often, right? And it's just a human thing to have to go through. So I would say I was a bit neutral when I entered, and again, there were things that I wanted to experience in medical school, and that's definitely been exciting. Like I wanted to be able to finally go and shadow, let's say, in the OR, and I've been fortunate to have that opportunity, and that's been exciting. But then I don't really worry about, oh, am I going to get a certain amount of like clinical exposure, get a certain amount of in-person hours, with COVID especially being the case. We know that a lot of us have had to adjust to a lot of COVID measures, or sorry, COVID limiting the way we get our education. And so I just kind of accepted what it was like, and I just rolled with it. And I think that's been the better way to go about it. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited to whatever unfolds. That I don't know. I know that doesn't really answer your question, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take, and I'm sure it's very exciting as well. But since we moved into med school now with Jayneel, so now we're experiencing what Jayneel is going through. Jayneel, can you talk about what your work-life balance is like as a medical student now that you've gone in?
Yeah. So once again, I'm going to say something that may not be something that you often hear about or want to hear about, but I think work-life balance is a bit of a misnomer. And the reason why I say that is because I personally feel that uh, a term like work-life integration is probably something that I personally believe in. And so, okay, what I'm trying to get at is I think with anything in life, especially medical school, it's really how you go about things that determine whether you need to balance things out or not. Uh, I've always gone about my life, especially in the last couple of years, um, based on priorities and like what I need to do in that moment to, I guess, go to the next step. And so even with medical school right now, that's kind of how I approach it. You know, I do what I need to do for medical school, but then I also just make sure that there's other things in my life that I'm always prioritizing simultaneously. It's not necessarily like this happens at one point and then this happens at the other point. And that's kind of why I think that the integration is probably the way I would phrase this instead of like a work-life balance. Because at the end of the day, the way I see it is I went into medicine because I wanted to work, right? Medicine is a career, is a field where there's a lot of work involved. And I'm not saying that you don't need a balance, you don't need your life. I'm actually saying the opposite. What I'm saying is you cannot separate the two because they're kind of intricately intertwined, especially with physicians. And that's what we need to realize earlier on so that we're not always finding ways to separate them. I think we face issues because we try to separate them. So that's why I think like where the way I go about my work-life balance is I just make sure that I'm living both simultaneously, if that helps. Again, I know this is complicated, but yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's a good way to just live life because then you're not like conflicting with each thing. You're just like saying that both things are there and everything makes sense. So I just wanted to move into another subject. We've read your blog, it's very good, and everyone should check it out. We'll link it below the video. And you talk about investing in yourself as a student and like especially surrounding what's investing on right now with crypto and stocks and everything, but you say that the biggest investment should be in yourself. So what do you mean by this and how can someone do this, especially when they're fighting with the 90s that they have to get into medical school, when they have to worry about taking the MCAT and the Casper and all these other things?
Right. Well, first of all, you guys are very kind. Thank you for the shout out, I suppose. I think what I mean by investing in yourself, and I agreed, you know, there's a lot of things at play, especially for us trying to navigate this journey. There's so many conflicting demands all the time. I think it's just about the process, right? So that's what I mean by investing in yourself. And it's really, really hard. Look, this takes a long time to understand that your efforts are not necessarily going to be reciprocated all the times. You're not going to have a result at the end of your efforts all the time. And investing in yourself is understanding that. So let's take that example of, you know, aiming for a certain grade or a mark. I obviously have gone through that process. I was there. I am kind of still there in a way too, although fortunately, you know, medical school works differently, but that's for some other time. Uh, I think what we can handle is the controllables. Like what we can control are the controllables. What we worry about are the uncontrollables. And as long as we're able to wrap our head around that, that's what investing in yourself as a student is about. It's kind of like you know that you have to put in an X amount of work for an exam or whatever it is, a project, whatever you want to call it. But then after, let's say the results don't follow, yes, the human reaction to that is it feels terrible, you feel disappointed, you feel dejected. But the recovery process has to do around the fact that you did your best. You ensured that all that was in your control was taken care of. Then the results doesn't matter because investing in yourself pays dividends long term, right? So when you've when you're used to a certain process, when you focus on the process always wins, but it wins over time. And that's what we need to realize as students. Maybe today you didn't get the 90, maybe today your project didn't go as well, but if you stick to that same process, ultimately it'll grow into something bigger. That's how investment works. So that's kind of what I mean by investing in yourself as students or like in life in general.
That's a very profound way of looking at it. I guess all of us should take some time to invest in ourselves and worry about the process more so than the end result, because at the end of the day, we're living life one day at a time. While the future is really important, it is equally as important, or arguably more important, that we don't stress out about what's going to happen in the future. We're gonna focus on getting better every single day, and I really like that kind of mindset, Jayneel. So I guess going along the same lines of these lessons that you've learned over the course of your years applying, and now that you're a current medical student, is there something that you would want your undergrad self to know, given your current experiences? And uh, would you want to tell your undergrad self anything, if at all?
Yeah, so I've thought about this before, and there's always things that I think there's two ways to look at this. First and foremost, I would say no, not necessarily. Like I wouldn't want anything to change, even though I had a long path to medicine. I'm very, very grateful for all the experiences because who I am today wouldn't have been possible if I didn't face all those obstacles or failures or whatever you want to call it. So I don't think I want to change any aspect of how I got here. And also, when you look back, there's always hindsight bias. Everything in retrospect is 2020. Having said that, there's always learnings, right? You always want to grow as individuals. So yeah, there's things that I think if I were to talk to my undergrad self, I would be like, first and foremost, things will work out. Like now, I know that things will work out, but back then I just had this understanding that, oh, maybe things will work out. I guess I would just tell myself that it will work out. Just be, again, focus on the process, all of that. That's like definitely the one thing that I would tell myself. And then the second thing is it's important to diversify your interests, even though I think, especially when you're going for a career like medicine, we often become narrow-minded or, tunnel visioned about what we want to achieve. And I think actually that's a good thing, but only to a certain degree, right? So I think throughout your undergrad degree, it's totally fine for you to be able to do that. But then at some point, you need to make a switch because then you need to realize that life also happens on the side. It needs to happen on the side. And whatever your life includes, right? It differs between individuals. But understanding that at some point, I'm not saying throughout undergrad, because I do believe that as a student, your goal is really to get to walk from one place to another. So that's the other thing I would tell myself. And then, yeah, actually, maybe yeah, those are probably the only two things I would tell myself.
Thank you so much, Jayneel. I would like to say that we already look up to you, and after this podcast, I think the main thing that I found inspiring was your mindset, and I'm sure Nimit and Rushil as well. I think you have a very inspiring and like different take on this entire process, and like the work-life balance that you talked about. So I think it's something that all of us should employ and try to see if it works for us as well. But I really like your no regrets kind of thing, looking back to it, and I'm still fine with everything that's happened. So I think that's very inspiring. But anyways, we're taking up too much of your time, so we'll end the podcast
Uh,
here. Jayneel, thank you so much.
Sorry, before you close up, I just wanted to say you guys are being way too kind. That's not really the thing. But I mean, the reason why I say that is because I think sometimes adversity does, breed character. Like it helps you develop a different perspective, and that's why I think I like adversity. Or I like, not saying that I wish adversity on anyone else or even myself, I guess, but I think it's just that when you go through adversity, including going through the medical school process, there's only two options that you have. Either you kind of get dejected at every step of the way, or you kind of take it as a learning point and then you just kind of grow from it. And then when you look back on it, I will guarantee you the dots always connect, right? So it's just like you have to pick your battle, you have to pick your sort of shield, and then you just kind of work with it.
For sure. Yeah, if you fall down, you learn something from it and you move on.
Sorry, just one more thing. Thank you all for having me. It was a pleasure talking to all of you. And yeah, guys, please subscribe to their podcast.